As if the speech of Canadians isn't already under attack enough, with the Trudeau government hellbent on bringing forward censorship laws like the online harms bill. But this time it isn't the Canadian government coming after the speech of a Canadian, it's Australia's. And they're coming after an activist known as Billboard Chris. Let's talk about it. Well, we meet again many times somehow with your activism that stands up for the protection of children and also comes against things like queer theory. You're a news source, that's for sure. But this time we have another country interfering and I guess effectively getting one of your tweets taken down in Australia. So thanks for being back on Rebel News. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the post you initially did?
Sure. So I'm on a campaign to end what I consider to be the greatest child abuse scandal in the history of modern medicine all across the world. And on Twitter, obviously, I comment about things going on in different countries. And in Australia, there is a trans-identified female. So this is a woman who now says she's a man. She's been hired by the World Health Organization to help draft their healthcare policy for trans-identified adults. This is someone who posted imagery of bestiality, who is into bondage, who's mutilated her own body, who says that trans-identified people have better sex when they're high on drugs, who is constantly tweeting out and posting to social media X-rated porn. This is not someone who should be determining healthcare standards for people who are already struggling with mental health comorbidities. So I wrote this tweet that said, this woman, yes, she's a female, has been hired by the WHO as one of a panel of 20 so-called experts to write their policy. And I said, essentially, the insane shouldn't be running the insane asylum. I wrote that people who belong in psychiatric wards should not be drafting policy for people who belong in psychiatric wards. And I don't say that to disparage all trans-identified people. This individual in particular is extreme. This is someone into bondage and bestiality, someone who supports queer theory. This is not okay to have these people determining healthcare for people who do, on average, have 5 or more coexisting mental health disorders.
And so, what you said there, I mean, if this was someone in Canada, they could potentially, if they wanted to, pursue you for defamation or something like that, or people could be offended. But we have a whole other country stepping in here. You received, I guess, a notice spearheaded by Julie Inman Grant, who is the ESafety Commissioner in Australia, also known as the World Economic Forum loving boss of online safety. And you got this notice that said that it was offensive, said that you're specifically targeting the person. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was because of a complaint in Canada. But again, this individual is on Australia that the tweet was about.
It's a complaint in Australia. So Teddy Cook is Australian. So I guess their policy, the ESafety Commissioner's policy in Australia is file your complaint with X, formerly Twitter. If they do nothing about it, come to us. And this isn't the first time they have dealt with this. The ESafety Commissioner has previously forced X to take down tweets talking about men breastfeeding because that was hurting the feelings of these poor men who inject themselves with chemicals in order to lactate some whatever that shouldn't be getting fed to babies, obviously. But this is an individual, Julie Inman Grant, the ESafety Commissioner, who formerly worked for Twitter as Director of Public Policy down in Australia. She's American, but she seems to have a personal vendetta against Elon Musk. And now she's going after me for freedom of speech. So all the freedom of speech patriots down under are on board with me in fighting this, and I'm going to be appealing it.
We'll talk about that a little bit more, but she also seems to have a vendetta against free speech. Take a look at this clip of her at the World Economic Forum saying that there needs to be some drastic changes to freedom of speech.
We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, from freedom of speech to the freedom to, to be free from online violence, or the right of data protection to the right to child dignity.
Folks, it's undeniable that our rights and freedoms are under attack. The Freedom Passport is an easy-to-read, pocket-sized booklet containing the Charter of Rights and Freedoms There's an app, too. Easily access the Freedom Passport on your phone and compare rights and freedoms from around the world for only $3.99. Visit freedompassport.ca and get your Freedom Passport today.
So I do want to touch on what was going through your head when you actually received this notice. And for the viewers, in case you're not aware and you haven't heard of this story yet, there was a huge threat to Elon Musk's X. It was around close to $800,000 Australian, which American is around 520,000. So this was a big deal. What was going through your mind when you're like, oh my goodness?
Yes, that's right. So X forwarded me their entire complaint that the ESafety Commissioner's office had sent to them. And it said that if they didn't take down the post within 24 hours, they could be fined a maximum of 782,500 Australian dollars. So they said that I was misgendering the person and that this was cyber abuse. And they said that it was abusive because I doubled down by saying, in fact, that yes, this person is a female, as though it was a mistake when I used the pronouns she, and that I was therefore condemning the person based on their transgender identity. Well, I pushed back by that, by saying I don't believe in gender identities. We're all male or female, and that's that. And I want nothing but the best for all humans in this world. But we don't have to play along with this ideology that teaches that children are born in the wrong bodies. And I'm not going to call people by anything other than sex-based pronouns, because I feel when you do that, you've got one foot inside the cult and you're lending legitimacy to a movement that is telling children they're born wrong and turning them into lifelong sterilized pharmaceutical patients.
And so you mentioned that you're appealing it. Did you hear anything further from Elon Musk or X about how they're handling the situation?
So X has made the tweet invisible to Australians. I think when they click on the URL for it, they can still see it, but it's basically not visible to Australians. And I haven't heard anything otherwise from Elon, although he did comment on 3 of my tweets on this subject. So he's very aware.
And as I've seen when I've interviewed you before, your message is just getting amplified. Somebody's trying to censor it and it's getting bigger and bigger. The tweet has gone viral. You have some Victorian MPs coming forward. If you look at the tweet here, she is likening it to Orwell's Ministry of Truth. And there's another MP speaking out about it as well. What about Canada's MPs? Anything from the Conservative government? Anybody speaking out on this?
No, I never hear from Canadian MPs. It's really funny. It's like that saying in the Bible about a preacher not being welcome in his own town. I go to other countries and other jurisdictions and I get nothing but love. But here in Canada, none of the MPs want to talk to me. None of the MLAs will touch this. I think they're afraid of me because they know I'm telling the truth and they know they look bad on this subject. So I have support all around the world. There's 2 MPs down in Australia and a senator who's going to be recording some content with me as well. So they're not all on board with this, of course, as they aren't in any country. And on the street level, where I conduct most of my conversations, it's always north of 90%. But in academia and in politics and in media and in entertainment, they're just virtue signaling still about this gender identity movement. I call it a cult because for all practical purposes, it is one. But we just need to keep getting the truth out there because it is getting out there. We're winning. Several countries have put a stop to the practice of giving kids puberty blockers. Several states have done so. The Alberta Premier is now on board with this, and the current president of the American College of Pediatricians, I know, met with the Minister of Health in Alberta last week. So we're getting places. We just got to keep having these conversations.
Well, Inman Grant is getting a little bit of pushback because it's been exposed that the threat, or whatever you want to call the notice you got, doesn't have as much teeth to the bite as it might seem. They can't completely take it down. And some are saying, well, where are the taxpayer dollars going? But while I have you here, this is Australia coming after the freedom of speech of a Canadian. But let's talk about the Online Harms Act that's probably going to be coming soon. What's your thoughts on that with the Trudeau government doing that?
Sure. So these bills look the same throughout all these different countries. The Bill C-63 is very similar to this Online Safety Act in Australia, where they gain wide acceptance for these bills by saying things like they're going to take down child sexual exploitation, which of course everyone can get behind, and common sense things like that. But the real purpose for these bills is to censor and control our speech. So under this new legislation, they want to be able to put people in prison for a very long time for hate speech. Well, what is hate speech? They can't define it. They're basing it off a ruling in the Supreme Court from the Whatcott case, which is where I guess hate rises to a level of detestation. Well, how do you determine what this is? This will ultimately be in the hands of an unelected bureaucrat, like in Australia, who ultimately gets to make decisions about what speech is appropriate and what isn't. And Canadians need to fight like heck to put a stop to this bill.
Well, there you have it. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News and Billboard Chris. Shortly after interviewing Billboard Chris, Rebel News learned that Elon Musk's X will be bringing forth a legal challenge against Australia's ESafety Commissioner's decision in order to stand up for his users' right to freedom of speech. More updates on this will be coming soon at stopthecensorship.com. A country without freedom of speech is a country without freedom. And if you agree, join our fight at Rebel News to stop the censorship in Canada by going to stopthecensorship.com, sign and share our petition demanding that the Trudeau government repeal their plans for online censorship. That's stopthecensorship.com.